Welcome to my April 2022 webinar. Got a long name this time: Bullies, Bad Actors, Put-offs, and Put-downs dash. How to handle conflict without being a victim. I started working on this with a bunch of questions. It was prompted, the topic was prompted to me by much too much experience of bullies and victims, and the question of how to deal with all of that kind of stuff that happens to everyone in their lives at some time or other, and sometimes in an ongoing kind of way. So I asked these questions. Do you cower when someone raises their voice? Are you crushed when someone gives you a piece of their mind, tells you off, criticizes you? Do you turn off the TV or blow off meetings because you take discord personally? And the year that we've just had, 2 years, with the pandemic and everything, there's been a lot of discord. There was discord even before the pandemic that was getting pretty intense. And so maybe you found yourself just stepping back from it all. I know many, many people who've done that. Finally, I said, do you avoid family and friends who are vociferously partisan? And so that brings it right at home, and sometimes even into the home. Sometimes it's a husband and wife that disagree in partisan ways. Sometimes it's between one member of a family and the rest of the family. Sometimes the whole family is divided in 2 or 3 or 4 camps on any particular issue. And things can get rather heated around the Thanksgiving dining table or any other occasion that the family gets together. I think when we talk about bullies, bad actors, and such, first of all, I think we need to know what we're talking about. But when we have a conversation around this, the goal is to get to a place where we are not making ourselves a victim, or we are not suffering because of another person's action. And I think this takes great strength. I've been watching a television series, Madam Secretary. Some of you may have seen it. 6 seasons of it. It's taken me more than a month to get through it. And in it, there's a great deal of contest between politicians, both in the United States, in the show, and with overseas ambassadors and such. And the secretary is the Secretary of State, a woman who got the job mainly because she had worked very closely with the president when they were both in the CIA, which is a very interesting setup for the story. And she has to deal with people all over the world. Some are just individuals, ordinary people, ordinary citizens. Others are extraordinary citizens, such as reporters, athletes, people who are visiting other countries because of their particular talents or gifts. And then there's the diplomats that she has to deal with, both her own, those who work for her in the State Department, and those who work for the foreign services of other countries. And the issues are beautifully presented. They're often very complicated. And gee, it just mirrors life so very much that, I find myself completely sucked in. Good things happen, bad things happen. But the secretary has to decide just how she's going to play it. whether she's going to come on very strong or make a appeal to higher, better angels, sometimes we say, and to higher causes and purposes, which is often successful with many of the foreign ministers in this particular show, this TV series, because they're very dedicated. They're all very dedicated. And so many times they are representing a national leader with whom they may agree philosophically, but may find the leader to be a very difficult person because they fit one of these categories. They're either bullies or bad actors who use the put-offs and put-downs to control and manipulate their own citizens and sometimes foreign countries. I won't cite any examples from our politics, from the United States politics, but certainly you can, when you think of these things, you can think of examples from people who are famous. And it's often very difficult to discern whether a person is just going for political gain or truly believes in a position that they're taking, often in opposition to the leadership of either the party or of the government, whether that be local, state, or national. So the television, one of the things I took away from this television show was an appreciation of how complicated any issue was. There was one story in the thing, one chapter, where Elizabeth, the Secretary of State, McCord is her last name in the show, Elizabeth McCord, needs to basically remove a dictator from a small country, maybe not that small now that I think about it, from power. And they finally basically buy him off by telling him that he can go live in a place, a lovely island, I think it was, and he can keep his money. And so he can have his good life, but he would no longer be the head of state of that country. And he agrees under considerable pressure, one of which I think was that the United States would go to war with him. So she had to be very tough with the guy and kind of bully him, but he was a bully. He was a person, a bully, a bad actor, who was taking advantage of his country, skimming a great deal of wealth off the top. And he needed to be gotten rid of for the sake of the country. And there was promises of US aid and economic development if he would leave. And he finally accepted that because he decided that for himself, he would be all right. It wasn't actually going to hurt him. A little loss of reputation, perhaps, but he at least was getting off without being charged as, for a number of crimes against his country. So let's go into some definitions of these terms and see if we can come to a little deeper understanding of how we have run into these kinds of people. So bullies are people who repeatedly seek to harm, especially to dominate and often intimidate those whom they perceive as vulnerable or weaker. So part of being a bully is not just promoting oneself and one's well-being or affluence, but it's identifying weaknesses in people and exploiting those weaknesses to make them feel bad. And I'm sure that because it's practically a universal phenomenon, everybody who watches this webinar has had an encounter, at least one, with a bully, and probably had, if you think back in your school days, because that's often where they appear, encounters with bullies. But gee, they can occur in any situation. Check out people at stores. Anybody had a run-in with police officer? How authoritarian they are, how in control of a situation they are, and how they often do things that humiliate or attempt to humiliate the people that they're encountering. And sometimes, of course, they use physical violence. Now, that's not all police officers, but unfortunately, it's a fairly common occurrence. And I've had any number of situations, not so much personally, but been aware of them, been peripherally involved in their stories, where I saw the consequences in people of their encounter with a bully. And many times it's an ongoing encounter. I watched a movie recently. It had been on my Netflix list for like forever. And it's a disc that I got. And it's called Tom Brown's School Days. I can't remember what year, but it's like 60s or 70s. It's an old movie about a lad who's in England, sent off to boarding school, known for its rugby, which, is a very physical game where strength and sometimes dirty play, may win the day. And while he arrives and he's still a young adolescent, and there's I think what we would call a junior, meaning somebody with another year to go before they would graduate out of the school. And he was there, and he was bullying everybody except those who were I once heard Maharishi say, puffing him up. And that was a beautiful way to say it. Those who were bolstering up this guy's position. And this bully was perfectly willing to use words, threats, put downs and put offs, and physical aggression. And ultimately, most bullies are willing to do things physically that the upstanding people that they're bullying will not do. And ultimately, what he does is Tom and the boy get into a fist fight, and they're really going at it. Tom is winning, even though he's the smaller. He's very quick, and he manages to land a good number of punches. And then the boy throws some powder or dirt in his face and gets in his eyes, and he can't see well. And then he attacks him and hits him wearing brass knuckles, which is a vicious thing to do. And he inflicts some wounds on Tom's head. And so ultimately, Tom is saved, so to speak, by the headmaster who sends the kid home. And the kid, of course, never believed that the headmaster would do it because his father gave a lot of money to the school. But in that peculiar situation, I'm going to call it peculiar, the dealing with a bully involved someone who was even more powerful, had more authority and more literal power to manage the situation. I think the story actually would have been better if in some way the schoolboys had supported Tom and overthrown the bully by just basically just saying, we're not going to let you bully us anymore. You can threaten us all you want, but you're going to take all of us on. But that level of organization did not emerge in the school. Even though they cheered Tom on, they didn't actually help him. And part of that was the ethic of it was one-on-one. And so you didn't pile on. But there were very few of the bullies in both the gang under this guy. And so it was an interesting situation that Tom found himself in, where he basically had to meet the bully on his own. And he would have done all right, except the bully cheated. So part of the story about bullies is their willingness to do things that other people won't do, and they know it. So to go back to the other story of Madam Secretary, Elizabeth McCord sometimes has to confront bullies and basically say, this is what we're going to do, and we have the power. And if you try to use force, such as, well, they at one point they were dealing with Russia potentially invading Ukraine. This was, mind you, actually somewhat on the horizon when that was filmed, but it wasn't really happening, and so they brought that up and they dealt with that situation. So there was this confrontation with bullies. And one of the things that Elizabeth is extremely good at in the story, and it's if bullies are a problem in your life, you might enjoy watching the series to see how she deals with people. Some of them arrogant and egotistical. Oh gosh, there's this kind of actually it's kind of funny scene if you can handle it. She visits the head of state of a country and is having a private meeting with him, which means none of her people are in the room and none of his are in the room. And he's being very flirtatious and very macho and very kind of chauvinist, actually, chauvinist, misogynist. And at one point, Elizabeth turns away from him, and this president comes up behind her and gives her a little squeeze on the buttocks. You have to understand, she was CIA trained. She was an operative. Without hesitation, she turns around and slugs him, breaking his nose. And I'm sorry, I have to kind of applaud that because it was a way of speaking to this man in no uncertain terms and not allowing herself to play the bully or get caught in a situation where he says, she says, and it's just, there's no real proof except he's got a broken nose. There was another movie, the Three Burials of, and it's a Hispanic name, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember it right at the moment. The movie was years and years ago, decades ago. And at the end of the movie, I think he's a sheriff who has taken a Border Patrol agent hostage or captive because the Border Patrol agent had murdered the fellow who's the movie's named after. And he takes him to Mexico, to the place where this Mexican fellow wanted to be buried. And it turns out the Mexican story was a little more glamorous than reality bears out. But nevertheless, the sheriff, he's either a sheriff or a farmer. I think he may have been just a farmer, and a rancher would be the proper term. But at the end, he kind of confronts the guy. He has a pistol, and I believe he fires it several times, if I remember the story correctly. And the poor guy is, he reaches the other guy. He reaches the Border Patrol agent. And after he convinces him that his way is not a good way, that his being such a bully and actually having murdered this Mexican, it's just not the way to go. And then when the guy becomes, contrite and, accepts that he has done something really bad, then the rancher just tells him to leave, tells him he's free to go and go live his life, go back to his wife, who isn't any too happy with him. And, that's the end of the story. It doesn't always turn out that way. And the method of, approach to it with violence, not always the best way. But as you see in Madam Secretary, most of the encounters, often which are done by video conferencing, are handled with where the person is treated with dignity rather than put down. So I was starting to do definitions and I didn't actually get through them. So we've talked a lot about bullies. Bad actors are people who deceive or take advantage of others. In psychology, we often say they're sociopaths. They have a need to get over, to manipulate other people and take advantage of them, often for their personal gain. But sometimes it's just like they're playing a game with their audience. whoever they're dealing with. And their goal is just to win that round for no particularly good reason other than ego gratification. And, I can think of politicians that I would put in that category, who oftentimes it's not even about power. It's more about, well, it is power, but it's more about just the ability to put others down. And so we'll get to that. Put-offs, to put off somebody is to turn them away, to reject them, or to cause an aversion, which is to say maybe either avert it for your own sake, or, not by your own action, or to create a kind of displeasure in the other person. So they step away from the situation, step away from whatever it was that they were seeking. And this is a common reaction of people who feel hurt and having felt vulnerable. And this is something that, as I said, that bullies and bad actors can sense in other people. And so many times that quality of being able to be put off or put down, put downs are expressions intended to diminish the status of the other person. That's why we say put down, right? It literally means to diminish someone's status. Put downs often take the form of teasing, and that's usually somewhere close to fairly benign. But it can also be comments that make fun of a person's appearance or their behavior. Sometimes it's their social status, and so on. In any case, their purpose is to make the person feel vulnerable, which means afraid and weak. So put-offs and put-downs are things that bullies and bad actors use to gain advantage over other people. So let's talk now about the vulnerability, about the capacity to become afraid of others and to feel weak, powerless in those situations, and how we actually act in those situations. And I may have a certain amount of personal experience in cowering, and I learned to use my intellect as a way of dealing with people who might otherwise have succeeded in physically putting me down. And I was pretty good at that, but also good at avoiding confrontations that might lead to physical violence. And the feeling of the fear and of the being hurt and the powerlessness, the weakness, the powerlessness, are things that I can recall. Fortunately, old man now, I don't get picked on very much, except on the basketball court sometimes. But in life, I'm relatively safe now. But most of us, if not all of us, in growing up, particularly, growing up is a time of contest. There's a certain about, of the game, of being desirable for a mate. And, we tend to think of life mates. I think maybe over the decades of the 20th and now 21st century, a life mate may not be the key issue, but, certainly having success, well, men say success with the ladies. I'm not sure what ladies say about that, but it has a reciprocal effect. Women want to be attractive. They want to be able to attract men. Men want to be virile and accepted as masculine. Yes, standards have changed quite a bit. The definitions of what those roles are has changed quite a bit and have overlapped now quite a bit. But playing, in some sense, playing in those roles is still very much a thing as we grow up. And then as we get older, usually it's in terms of business or social life. A lot of people, we know about business competition. I hardly need to even speak about that. And sometimes, in business, one person representing a company may compete with another company in a way that really hurts them financially, or, well, it all boils down to money, hurts them financially. But their sense of it is what I was describing earlier, is the need to harm others, to dominate others. So it's not always just about what they get in terms of success, which can be social success too, social status, but it's that feeling of winning and defeating someone else. And so the competition often, it may, to one side, one party, the competition may be purely, like a game of that you're playing, like chess, where you're just trying to win the game. You're trying to have the greatest success financially. But sometimes it's a dirty game, or played dirty, because the goal isn't just financial success. It's actually hurting others. And so they may use dirty tricks and that sort of thing, as I was describing the story about Tom Brown and his battle with the bully in his life. So the contest often persists through much of life. And I've known some businessmen. I, of course, was a physician. Physicians don't compete that much, partly because usually there was enough work for everybody and it wasn't really an issue. But some will compete, particularly for prestigious positions. So there is perhaps some of that in business, or in medicine, but it's certainly very much a part of business. So as we grow up, we find our competition either for social status or business, or both. And a lot of people, when I was growing up, the women competed for social status, and part of their social status was success and social position of their men, their husbands. And I don't know how true that is today. I'm in no position to assess it. But that was very much a thing I was aware of when I was a kid. And of course, the husbands, trying to have good positions, adequate income, the neighborhood you'd live in, what kind of housing you could afford, what kind of car you would drive. I mean, my God, that was a really big thing. A lot of times people bought up, meaning bought things that were kind of out of their price range just to show off and to assume a social position, even though it wasn't really the level that they were actually earning at. But that kind of competition, was a very real thing. I think that kind of covers that material. So I just want to, again, because we're going to move into the group clearing session where we're going to work on our stuff. And so I want you to be, at this point, starting to remember situations that may have affected your life as you were growing up, where you were put off or put down, you were bullied, or you had to confront bad actors who, did everything they could to deceive and take advantage of you. I have a little clip. I'll just read you a little part of it. That was about the tech companies and being regulated, and things that they might have to do about their platforms. This is social media mainly, about their platforms being used to spread disinformation, lies about others and about countries and governments and all kinds of things, even sometimes businesses. And the bad actors were sending fraudulent text messages using Verizon as a platform. And so the messages went to Verizon company clients, customers. And the funny thing was that they would manipulate the text messages to cell phones that made the messages look like they were coming from the recipient's phone number. Well, you'd think that anybody that saw a text message from oneself, one's own phone number, you'd know immediately it was fraud. You just delete it. But apparently some people got into some trouble because they responded to what was in the text message because they're often drafted in ways that look very authoritative. But the information was false, and they were trying to collect passwords and social security numbers and things like that. And so Verizon tried to block the source of a set of messages, someone who was sending them. They have ways of tracking these things down, but they were basically saying, we can't monitor everything that goes on. There's no way to do it. There's some things that are in place, which is like monitoring for certain words or phrases, but the smart text people will put in a misspelling, basically a misspelling. Sometimes put in a character instead of a letter, and so the algorithms that scan messages for possible fraudulent kinds of comments can slip past those algorithms. So it's not without, it's a difficult thing. And so the many platforms have argued that they can do some things, but they mostly depend on people reporting things that they believe are not true or harmful, hurtful. And then the company looks into it, and they have often long criteria, detailed criteria for what they will flag and what they might delete. And I've seen, I'm sure you all have, if you've been at all in social media, I've seen things on Facebook and Twitter where, it says content not available, or the information in this tweet has been fact checked and found not to be true, or something like that. If I remember, Trump got flagged for some things that he said, and then I believe he was kicked off of a couple of platforms because he was basically using them to spread disinformation. So even the big and powerful occasionally will get their hands slapped by these companies, but oftentimes not. Anyway, it's a way bad actors, it's just an example of bad actors, people trying to take advantage and deceive others, and often in a sense to rob them, to get them to give up information or even money that, would cost them. So let's take a moment, just a moment, to kind of think of what we want to work on in the group clearing session. And I'll also invite you at this time, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. I was playing today with, somebody has helped me, the 3 burials of Melquiades Estrada. Okay, the 3 burials of Melquiades Estrada. I don't know how my Spanish pronunciation is. So any other questions right now, you can put them in the chat. I'll repeat the question. And I think in the chat, you can set who the message goes to everyone, which gives you an opportunity to share your message with the whole group. Otherwise, it just comes to me, and that's fine. I can, I'll just kind of repeat it. So I'll give you just another moment. So if you can't think of any question you want to ask, then just think about examples where you had to deal with bullies and how you dealt with them. And in the group clearing session, I will give you some tools, some ways of dealing with that. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to go ahead and end this recording.